Jeff Lee, thanks for joining me on this series, Leadership in a Crisis. We really are in a crisis, and it's affecting virtually every industry, every sector. You are in the honeybee business. You're experiencing challenges that are associated with the healthcare crisis as well. How are you being impacted?
Well, actually, in one way, the effects are minimal if you want to look at it from a point of production of bees. But if you look at it from supply of food or supply of anything that we do in our business, it's actually quite profound. I'll give you an example. We've seen our demand for honey significantly rise as stores try and deal with shortage in customer buying habits. We have suffered significant problems in terms of getting access to temporary foreign labor that we need as we go into this new season. We also face the challenge of just simply, we've had a dry up of all of our revenue from things like farmers markets where they're not holding them anymore. So for us, it's been a challenge to try and figure out how to meet this new demand at the same time that we have this increasing scale of work that is causing us to run like hell.
So, because you are an entrepreneur, what are some of the ways in which you're trying to deal with these challenges?
Well, I mean, look, the first big thing that affected us was the fact that we had applied for a temporary foreign worker. We needed an experienced apiary technician, and we can't find that person in Canada. As a matter of fact, most commercial beekeeping operations in Canada have that trouble. That's why they depend very heavily on temporary foreign workers. And in our case, we got approval to bring a temporary foreign worker in. And as soon as we received that approval, the borders shut down. So even though TFWs are allowed to be brought into Canada, the worker that we've identified is actually stuck behind her borders in Kenya and as well the borders here. So, one of the challenges is that if we can get her here, we're going to have to immediately quarantine her for 14 days. Mm-hmm. And that's not really a problem for us, but it's an additional cost to the business. So from a labor perspective, what we're having to do is we're having to reach out to friends who we know have some beekeeping skills and say, well, perhaps you can help us over the short term. Everybody is sort of having to lay down tools, and some of the jobs that they had where perhaps their businesses have closed, and so some of them have become available. But it's a very inconsistent approach to running a business. We could go the other way. We could simply go out and hire some inexperienced kids right now if they want to work, and then we spend the time and the money to train them. But one of the issues is that it interferes with the workflow that we have. We have to train again, and then it's easy to be able to keep them. So from a labor perspective, it's a challenge right off the bat. From a stock replacement point of view, one of the things that happened with this coronavirus is that it completely interrupted supply lines of all kinds of products. Now, it's not just the fact that restaurants were closed, or that people lost their jobs, or that they have to work from home. In this one instance, let me tell you what it's done to the commercial beekeeping business. In Canada, every spring, we bring in hundreds of thousands of packages from places like New Zealand and Australia to replace colonies that have died out. So commercial beekeepers everywhere require these packages. We also bring in across Canada more than 250,000 queens that are used to build production. And those queens come from places like California, Hawaii, New Zealand, Australia, and Chile. Well, almost immediately what's happened is that those supply lines have evaporated. Air Canada, which was known for being able to queens once they got landed, stopped carrying them. So if you want to get queens now, you either have to drive across the border and have already had a permit to import them into Canada. You have to drive across the border and then go through all the phytosanitary issues, or you just don't get them. Now, in our case, we got one of the last shipments of queens that we need from New Zealand for our expansion. That has caused us to have to change how we are looking at our business over the course of this next season. So, if you can imagine what it's like for just simply the importation of replacement stock, think of what it's like for any other business that requires air transport or truck transport for goods supplying Canadian customers.
With the current environment right now for your business, how do you manage to plan in a way that says, well, this is what we can do to produce honey, but also you play an important role in the pollination of farmers' crops? How do you work with them to ensure that they're getting what they need as well? Because that's all part of the food supply chain.
It is, and I mean, we're fortunate this year as opposed to say last year. This year we have a very high overwintering success with our livestock. We're running probably around about 85%. So we actually have the volume of hives available for the clients that we have. If we'd had a higher overwintering loss, it would have been touch and go. And in fact, actually, for a lot of beekeepers in British Columbia, that is actually the case, where they've had higher overwintering losses and they don't have access to the replacement stock that they would use to build up in time for pollination. So one of the things that we are doing here is that we've switched gears. We are now producing, as of starting in the next week and a half to 2 weeks, we're going to start making small nucleus colonies with those added queens that we got. And those nucleus colonies will then be used, we'll sell them to other beekeepers to try and replace their stock. We have to have a Canadian-made solution to an international problem here, and that is that we have to backfill from Canada the services or the products that we need. I mean, I think if you let me be philosophical here for a minute, I do think that what the COVID-19 crisis is doing is causing us all to understand that our global international networks are not nearly as robust as we would like to think that they are, and that we as Canadians need to consider options for how we stabilize at home and then work for exportation purposes.
So why did we wind up in a situation where we were looking at these global connections to supply the Canadian industry, which now all of a sudden makes us vulnerable? So that highlights that the fact, that vulnerability. But then also, I guess the carry on to that is, what's the opportunity that comes out of this?
Well, I can speak to the issue of queens and bees. The issue that Canada has always had is largely its weather. We don't have the ability to produce queens or bees for production early in the year. The first time that we can actually make a mated queen is somewhere between mid-May and early June, and the season is fairly short, so it goes to, say, August. So when you have colonies that die over the winter, and you have pollination, for example, that starts in April, the only way that you can meet that demand is to bring in packages and bees from other countries. And that's actually been a very effective way of doing it. Now, up until 1987, Canada was bringing in a lot of packages from the United States. The border was closed at that time because of the arrival of the varroa mite and also tracheal mite and other diseases that caused Canada to reject U.S. packaging. Having said that, we still depend upon them for queens out of places like Hawaii and California, where they don't have Africanized honeybee. What we're doing in Canada, and it's actually been in place for quite some time, is research about how do we stabilize our needs. So even if we need queens, say in June or July, and we can't get them until that time, what can we do to make it easier for us? And one of the, there's actually some, I think British Columbia is leading in this experiment, and it's been funded in part through the Ministry of Agriculture, is a lot of individual beekeepers are experimenting with overwintering queens from last year. Now, to explain this, Stuart, in our business, the way bee genetics are is that you generally want to replace your production quality queens about every year. Maybe if you're lucky, if they're good queens, every 2 years. So that usually means that come fall, you have already replaced most of your stock to make sure that you have a fresh young queen going into the spring. Well, what we're now learning how to do is to improve the genetics of the queens that we're breeding. And the idea is that we create young queens in, say, July. And we're not even using them for producing honey this year. What we're doing is we're building them to put into small nucleus colonies, and then we overwinter those colonies so that when they come into the spring, we now have a very young queen, which, it's 6 to 8 months old. That queen can now build up our production in the springtime. It may take down the reliance on import queens a bit. It is still a challenge because getting small nucleus colonies to survive over the winter is it's not easy to do. So, I mean, I'm going to give you an example. We put 50 nucleus colonies into winter this year, and we had a 25% survival rate, and that's not good. I mean, it's a mistake on my part, but what we're doing and what commercial beekeepers are doing all across British Columbia is trying to find ways that we can actually build our own queen business in British Columbia that can then supply the prairie provinces in the springtime when they have this demand for new colonies.
Mm-hmm. So does that become a new opportunity for you and other beekeepers to create a division of your business that maybe people weren't willing to look at before, but now we say, okay, we see why it's important to do so?
Well, sure, of course. I mean, I'll tell you, it's an unfortunate secret about the pollination business is that the pollination business doesn't make us nearly as much money as producing bees and queens. When we go into pollination in the springtime, we rent our hives to a farmer for about, say, $100 a box. Now, if that farmer takes care of our bees in the sense that he doesn't spray them and they have a good season, then our bees do well. But a lot of farmers don't look at bees as being their prime concern. Their concern is making sure that they have a healthy tree and a healthy bush with healthy bloom or healthy fruit. So there's always this push me pull you of spraying their bushes at the same time risking the health of our bees. Mm-hmm. So when I put a box of bees into an orchardist cherry field or cherry orchard, I'll get $100 a box. But if I take that box and I keep it out of his orchard and I don't run the risk of it being sprayed with a fungicide or even an insecticide, I can then, if that colony is building up, there's no risk, I can then split that colony into, say, 2. Well, I sell a colony for $250. So automatically I have more than doubled my money by not going into pollination. And I haven't had the risk of, if the farmer accidentally sprays my hive or if he mistreats my bees, not only if I lose that hive, I also lose the production of the honey later in the year. Mm-hmm. So farmers have to learn that, and a lot of them are doing it. I mean, I will give them a lot of credit. There's a lot of good messaging going out there, but we still have some people who don't see bees as an integral part of their business, and so as a result, there's a backlash among beekeepers who say, you know what, there's more opportunity for me to be able to make nucleus colonies or queens and sell them to other beekeepers that need them because there's this unmet need in Canada than for me to put my bees into pollination. And we saw that 2 years ago in the blueberry industry in the Lower Mainland, where the rise of some problems, some overactive spraying of fungicides resulted in harm to colonies, and Alberta beekeepers who were backfilling what British Columbian beekeepers couldn't do, they said, we're not coming to BC anymore. So BC's blueberry business took a hit for that. Thankfully, saner heads are prevailing, and I think that there's a lot more education about this. But as long as beekeepers are finding their livestock at risk, there's going to be less inclination to put them into pollination. To answer your question, that's a boon for supplying the rest of the country with needed bees, but it's not really a good solution for food security in the fruit and berry industry.
So we're full on into week 3 now of the response to COVID-19. When you look back at what your initial response to it or thoughts were about how it would affect your business versus the way you're seeing it now, are you more optimistic than you were, or are you seeing increasing concern about how you're going to come through this season?
Look, for other businesses, the answer perhaps may be more dire. For us, we are an agricultural industry. We're a product that is produced over a seasonal period. So what is going to happen for us is that we are going to go into nuke production. We're going to go into honey production, and we will know at the end of August or September what our honey production will be like. So we're insulated in some ways from that because the production of the honey will take the next season. I'm not concerned about that. Although, to be honest with you, I woke up this morning and it's the first week of April and we still have snow on the ground. So a seasonal issue for me is the weather. From a long-term food security supply point of view, I'm not concerned. I have another challenge that took place in that less than 2 weeks ago, I suffered a severe heart attack, and that itself has probably a bigger impact on our business than anything else because I have to make sure that I employ someone to help me take some of the workload off of me that I've normally been shouldering. So, I think the short answer to your question is that I think for farmers, the answer may be we're a little bit better insulated than other industries because we have a season coming up. Were this to have happened mid-season or say later in the season, then I think that we could seriously see some problems. Now, in our particular case, we never have enough honey at the end of the season. Come this time of the year, I'm actually having to go out and buy honey from beekeepers that I trust so that I can continue to supply my commercial customers. Mm-hmm. If for some reason we were to overproduce honey this year and not have enough sales, you know what? That means that I don't have to buy honey next spring for the 2021 market. So that's maybe not a bad way. But in the short term, has it meant a hit to our bank account? Absolutely. Are we terribly concerned about it? Not really. We're trying to put on a brave face. And Stu, you know me well enough to know that I'm a blindingly optimistic human being at the best of times.
Okay, so what's a motivational quote that you turn to from time to time that you sort of go, oh yeah, that's right, and that you can share with others who might, in a moment, need a little bit of inspiration?
I don't know if it's a quote, but I do have a sort of a view about life, and that is that it's the long game. It's I have been through, and I don't mean to really share this out in public, but I will. Um, I have been through uh, 3 marriages, 2 divorces, a personal bankruptcy when I was a young man, a lot of personal tribulations. I've seen a lot of this kind of stuff in my job, my old job as a reporter. I've had a heart attack. I've come close to buying it when I was out in a war zone in Iraq. And throughout it all, the attitude that I take is one day at a time. Plan yourself out of it, and accept that sometimes life deals you. I mean, I hate that phrase about making lemonade out of lemons, but really, it's if you have a positive outlook, it will get you a heck of a lot further than if you wake up in the morning and you say, "Oh God, this is a terrible day." I can't do that. Right?
Yeah.
They're gonna have to drag me kicking and screaming into the grave, and I kind of think that a positive outlook is what gets us through life.
Well, I agree, but I also, have to add in the fact that there's effort that is a big part of this as well. I at times turn to the excerpt from Teddy Roosevelt's speech at Sorbonne University back about 100 years ago, called "Citizenship in a Republic." But there's a segment out of that called "The Man in the Arena." And he says it's not the critic who counts. It's not the person who points out to the doer of deeds how they could have done them better. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, who's gone through all those battles, who's muddied and beaten up. And at the end of it, whether they've had great success or catastrophe, they will never be in that cold and lonely place as someone who never dared at all. And you're out there daring every day, Jeff. You have your entire career, and I think that's what inspires me. I look at you and go, "Well, if Jeff Lee can do it, so can I."
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean,
Yeah.
I have been blessed to live in a lot of different countries in the world and to experience a very rewarding life. And I've, as a journalist, I was witness to a lot of really inspiring stories. I have always thought that one needs to look forward to challenge rather than to, sort of hide from it or
Mm-hmm.
reject it. We are all made stronger. I mean, I have this funny anecdote that I tell, that when I first moved to Canada I was like 7 years old. My parents took me over to Kerrisdale Arena in Vancouver, and I was learning how to skate, and ankles like this, and falling down all the time and edging my way along the rink boards, and I kept on falling, and eventually one of the rink monitors came over and picked me up, and he said, he says, the more you fall, the faster you learn. And about 3 minutes later, that rink monitor had to come over and say, you don't need to keep on deliberately falling down to learn that lesson.
Well, Jeff, I don't think you're falling down right now. I think that what you're doing in the honey business and helping all of us to appreciate the role of honeybees in the food chain, as well as supplying your extraordinary honey, is fantastic. And I knowing you, I know that you and Amanda will work your way through this crisis, and you'll come out strong the other end. Thank you for sharing what the situation is for you right now, and also giving us a little bit more information about the very important role that honeybees play in the pollination cycle in our food chain. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for this.